The document arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, and Vivienne Ashmore read it standing up because she could not bring herself to sit. The paper was official in every visible way: county seal, notary signature, surveyor's mark, and wrong in every material one. She knew the moorland. She had mapped it on her hands and knees across 14 years and 4 seasons, pressing her fingers into peat, counting root systems, recording the precise coordinates of every boundary ridge with the kind of attention that left no room for error. What Pemberton's surveyor had produced was not a map of the moorland. It was a map of what Pemberton wished the moorland to be, rendered in official ink. And it was precise enough to hold up in court before a commissioner who had never set foot north of the county road. She stood at her desk with the document in both hands, rain hitting the study window in long diagonal lines, and she was still standing there when someone knocked at the front door. She opened it herself. The housekeeper had gone to market, and found a man on the steps she recognized by reputation and had never spoken to directly. He was tall enough to block the gray light behind him. His coat was wet through at the shoulders. In his right hand, held slightly away from his body as though it carried a smell, was a document that looked precisely like the one she had just been reading. "Miss Ashmore," the Duke of Cairnmore said. She looked at him. She looked at the paper. "You have 20 minutes to convince me this is worth my time." "I'll need 15, he said. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. This is how 3 years begin. He was at the map table in 4 minutes, his wet coat on the hook by the door. She had not offered to take it, and he had not asked. And the geological survey he had brought unrolled beside her botanical one, with the efficiency of a man who had already decided where he needed to stand. Rowan Blackwell, Duke of Cairnmore, was 36 years old, a widower, and a member of Parliament for the county. She knew these things the way one knows the contents of a newspaper without having sought them. What she had not known, and what became apparent within the first 6 minutes, was that he was also a competent geologist. "Here," he said, pressing a finger to his map. "Pemberton's survey places the northern boundary along the drainage cut. But your botanical record," he glanced at her document, "shows marsh cinquefoil distributed continuously from this ridge to this one, which is impossible if the drainage cut is the boundary, because cinquefoil doesn't cross open water in that density without a land bridge." Vivienne looked at where his finger rested. Then she looked at her own field notes. "The land bridge was there until 1841, she said. "My father mapped it. The drainage cut was dug the following year by Pemberton's grandfather." So Pemberton's surveyor is using the post-1842 geography to establish a pre-1842 claim. "Yes," she said. "And your botanical record predates the drainage cut." "My father's does. Mine confirms it has not changed." She looked up. That is not, by itself, enough to defeat a fraudulent deed in court. The deed exists. It has been filed. It will be cited. "I know," he said. "But your survey is the only evidence that establishes physical continuity of the land as a single parcel before and after the cut. Without it, Pemberton's claim has no counter-argument. With it, his surveyor has a problem he cannot explain away." He straightened. "I have geological strata records going back to 1798 that corroborate your boundary ridge. Together, they constitute a case." She looked at him for a moment. 14 minutes had passed. "You may come back Thursday," Vivienne said. He came back Thursday, then the following Monday, then twice the week after that, until the sessions at the map table were simply a condition of the week, the way rain was a condition of October. They worked in the formal register of 2 people who are aware that county society has opinions about unmarried women and widowed dukes sharing a room with the door open and a great many documents. The formality lasted approximately 10 days. After that, it gave way to the kind of argument that develops between two people who are frequently right at the same time and find the coincidence irritating. "You are mapping the strata by elevation," Vivienne said one afternoon, her finger tracing the contour line he had drawn. "But the elevation here is anomalous. There was a collapse in 1863. I have it in my field notes, which means your 1798 baseline is measuring a different surface than the one that exists now." "I'm aware of the collapse," he said. "Then why is your contour line at 340 feet? "Because the collapse affected the surface, not the underlying strata. The legal boundary follows the strata, not the surface." She was quiet for a moment. "That is actually correct," she said, and returned to her own work without further comment. And he had the good sense not to look pleased about it. Society did notice. It was unavoidable. The Duke's carriage outside Ashmore House 2 mornings a week was the kind of detail that moved through county drawing rooms with considerable speed, acquiring implications at each stop. Vivienne was aware of this, and had decided, with the directness that characterized most of her decisions, that she did not care. She was 34 years old. She had been not caring about county opinion since she was 22, which was the year she had declined her first offer of marriage on the grounds that the man in question believed her botanical work was a charming hobby. She had not revised this position in the intervening 12 years, and she did not intend to begin now. What she had not anticipated was the quality of the Duke's attention. Not to her, or not only to her, but to the work itself. He read her field notes with the focus of someone who understood what he was reading, asked questions that required real answers, and never once suggested that her methods needed simplifying. When he disagreed with her conclusions, he said so directly and gave his reasons. When she demonstrated he was wrong, he revised his position without theater. She found this, against her better judgment, difficult to dismiss. Lord Pemberton came to Ashmore House on a Wednesday in the 5th week, unannounced and apparently unconcerned about the impropriety of it. He was 52, smooth-faced, and possessed of the kind of courtesy that functions as its own form of menace. He sat in the chair she did not offer him and spoke to her in the measured tones of a man explaining a simple matter to someone who had not yet understood it. "Miss Ashmore," Pemberton said, "I have the greatest respect for your late father's work. It is precisely because of that respect that I come to you now, before this matter reaches a stage that becomes uncomfortable for everyone. The deed is filed. The survey is complete. I would prefer not to see the Ashmore name attached to a protracted legal dispute that can only end one way." "I appreciate your concern," Vivienne said, and her voice was entirely even. "The Ashmore name will manage. Your association with Cairnmore will not help you," Pemberton said. "A duke with a reputation for interference in county disputes, and a botanist with an unpublished survey. The commissioner will see what the county sees. 2 people with a shared interest in the outcome, which is not the same as 2 people with evidence." He said it pleasantly. That was the particular skill of men like Pemberton, the ability to issue a threat in the register of a kindness, so that the recipient could not object without appearing unreasonable. Vivienne was preparing a response when she became aware that the Duke, who had been preparing to leave when Pemberton arrived, had not left. He was standing near the window, coat on, hat in hand, large and attentive and completely still. He did not speak. He did not move toward Pemberton or away from him. He simply remained present, and his presence in the room had the effect of changing the room's proportions. Pemberton left 7 minutes later, still pleasant, still certain. After he was gone, Vivienne said nothing for a moment. Then she went to the side table and poured 2 cups of tea. She brought one to the Duke without comment and returned to the map table with her own. "Thank you," he said. "I was making tea," Vivienne said, and opened her field notebook. The following Tuesday, at the map table, he reached across her to correct the position of her finger on the boundary marker. She had been pointing to the wrong ridge, a half-inch discrepancy that would have misread the coordinate. His hand covered hers for a moment, redirected her finger to the correct point, and then stayed. 1 second, perhaps 2, the room was quiet. Neither of them said anything about it, and they returned to work, and the afternoon continued as though nothing had shifted. But something had. In the small and specific way that things shift when 2 people have decided, without discussing it, to be aware of each other. He proposed 6 weeks after that first wet Tuesday. They were in the Ashmore study after a long afternoon of cross-referencing survey dates, and he did it without preamble, which was the only style she would have believed from him. "I would like to marry you," the Duke said. She set down her pencil. "No. You haven't heard my... I don't need to." She was direct, and she was kind, and she was absolutely certain. "If we are allied in this case, and then we marry, every person in this county will conclude that you won my land for me, and I married you in gratitude. That conclusion will follow me after the case is resolved, after the deed is struck down, after I have published the survey. It will follow me longer than any of it. I will not put myself in that position." He looked at her steadily. "I am not trying to win anything for you. I am trying to fight beside you." "There is a difference," Vivienne said, "between fighting beside someone and deciding for them. You have not yet demonstrated that you understand what that difference means." She picked up her pencil. "When you do, the question will be worth revisiting." He left without arguing. She watched him go and noted, with a precision she applied to most things, that his expression was not wounded or angry. It was the expression of a man who has just been told something accurate about himself and does not yet know what to do with it. Autumn came in fully, and the work deepened. A shared shorthand developed across the weeks, geological notation and botanical classification borrowing from each other. 2 people whose minds moved in similar shapes, discovering the fact with mutual irritation and growing reliance. He began to anticipate which field note she would reach for. She began to finish his geological arguments before he completed them, which annoyed him considerably, and which she found she did not particularly want to stop doing. Pemberton delivered a settlement offer in the 8th week of autumn. It arrived by solicitor's letter, formally worded, apparently generous. It offered to drop the northern boundary dispute in exchange for a recorded easement across the southern meadow. Vivienne read it twice, identified the clause on the 3rd page that would effectively cede the northern moorland under a different legal instrument, and declined it in writing the same afternoon. She sent her response before she mentioned the offer to the Duke at all. He received a copy of her letter. She had copied him, as she copied him on all case correspondence, and said nothing about it when he arrived the following morning, except to place her response letter beside the settlement offer on the table and say, "The clause on page 3, I saw it too." "I know you did," Vivienne said. "I wasn't going to suggest you accept it. I know that too." She looked up, but I needed to decline it myself. He understood the distinction. She could see that he did, and it mattered to her that he did, though she did not say so. His second proposal came 3 weeks later. It was less certain than the first. The arrogance had reduced by a visible degree, replaced by something that looked more like genuine uncertainty, which suited him better. "I know your objection," he said. "I have been thinking about it. I believe I understand the difference you described. What do you understand? Vivienne asked. That fighting beside you means bringing what I know and leaving the decisions to you. That deciding for you means assuming I know better than you what outcome you can bear. He paused. I think I have been doing the former. I want to be sure you agree. She stood at the window for a long moment, looking out at the November garden where nothing was flowering. Then she turned back. I don't disagree with what you've said, she told him. But understanding a principle and having demonstrated it over time are two different things. Ask me again when the difference is not theoretical. The refusal took longer this time. He noticed. She noticed that he noticed and said nothing about it. And they returned to work. They walked the contested moorland together in late November to verify her boundary survey against the physical terrain, a necessary step before the county hearing, and one that required two people because the ridge coordinates needed simultaneous readings from both ends. The moor was wet, and the shale along the northern ridge was treacherous after 3 days of rain. She was mid-sentence, explaining the relationship between the cinquefoil distribution and the 1798 strata line, when her boot found a loose piece of shale and slid. She went sideways, and he caught her. Both hands, at her waist, the grip firm and immediate. He held her for 3 full seconds while she found her footing on the wet ground, and then released her, and she stepped away and continued the sentence she had been in the middle of. And he listened to it, and they walked on. Neither of them mentioned it. 2 days later, Nell came to Vivienne's study in the early morning and stood in the doorway with her hands clasped and her face arranged in the particular stillness of someone who has decided to say a hard thing and is afraid of what comes after. Nell was 23, Vivienne's research assistant for 4 years, a careful girl with a good eye for botanical detail, and a brother whose debts had apparently made her vulnerable to Pemberton's solicitor in ways she had not found a way to refuse. He threatened Thomas, Nell said. Thomas owes money to a man Pemberton knows. They came to me in September and told me what they wanted. I told them your filing dates. I told them when the survey would be complete. I told them about the boundary ridge. She stopped. I am sorry. I am genuinely sorry. I did not know how to stop it. Vivienne was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of feeling, but its precise organization. Sit down, she said finally. And Nell sat, and Vivienne asked every question she needed to ask in order to understand exactly what had been disclosed and when. And Nell answered all of them. That evening, the Duke came to Ashmore House, and Vivienne told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, I need to look at something. I'll return in the morning. He returned before breakfast. He had filed a counter-instrument overnight, a legal document that removed Pemberton's solicitor's ability to act on Thomas's debt by attaching it to a different instrument, one under the Duke's own authority, which effectively made Pemberton's threat to Nell legally toothless. He had done this without telling her he was going to do it, so that by morning it was already done, and Nell was no longer in danger. Vivienne read the filing summary he placed on the table. That was the right thing, she said. It was the first time she had said anything to him that was not argument or instruction. He heard the difference. She saw that he did. She found the letter 6 weeks later in his document case. She had been looking for the 1841 drainage survey. He had borrowed it the previous Thursday, and she needed it for the commissioner's preliminary filing. His case was open on the table. She was moving documents aside when the letter appeared. It was in her father's handwriting. She knew that handwriting the way she knew her own, the particular slope of the capital A, the way the R closed too tightly at the top. She should not have read it. She read it. It was a draft. A letter never sent, addressed to the secretary of Sir Edmund's institution, referencing a taxonomic misidentification in a paper on moorland sedge classification. Her father's handwriting, her father's careful phrasing, and at the center of it, a clear, documented error. The kind that, cited in a county hearing, would cast doubt on the entire methodological foundation of his botanical work. The kind that Pemberton's surveyor could use to argue that Vivienne's maps rested on a compromised foundation. She was sitting at the table, the letter in both hands, when the Duke came in from the hallway. "Did you know about this?" Vivienne asked. He looked at the letter. His expression did not change, which was its own kind of answer. "Yes," he said. "Did you suppress my father's final paper?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm it. "Yes," he said quietly. She set the letter down on the table, with the deliberate care of someone managing a considerable amount of feeling. "Tell me what right you had," she said, "to decide what my father's legacy meant to me. I was protecting you." He said it quietly, and she could hear in his voice that he understood, even as he said it, that it was the wrong answer. "That," Vivienne said, "is the answer of a man who does not believe the person he is protecting can bear the truth." She looked at him directly. "I have built my entire scientific life on the principle that errors must be named and corrected. My father taught me that. He believed it himself. That letter proves it. He was going to publish the correction. And you decided, without asking me, that I could not be trusted to grieve his mistake and continue my own work. You thought you knew better than I did what I could carry." Her voice was precise, not loud. "I will not marry a man who thinks I need protecting from the truth of my own life. That is not a wounded feeling. It is a principle. Do you understand the difference?" He met her gaze steadily. "Yes." He stopped lying that afternoon. He disclosed everything, the suppressed paper, the reason for it, and then, after a moment in which she could see him decide, the journal arrangement as well. For 3 years he had been ensuring her research methods appeared in a respected scientific journal under her initials, because her father's institution had refused to publish a woman's name. He had found a contact at the journal, drawn up a formal arrangement, and maintained it anonymously. She had been cited as V. Ashmore's methodology in 4 successive issues without knowing he had made it possible. "The contract is in my study drawer," he said. "I will bring it to you tomorrow if you want to see it." Vivienne said nothing for a long time. Then, "I will come and look at it myself." She went to his study the following morning, found the drawer, found the contract, his signature, the journal editor's signature, her initials in the published record. 3 years of it. She stood in his study with the contract in her hands and felt 2 things simultaneously. The anger at the silence and something she did not have a name for, yet that was not gratitude exactly, but was adjacent to it. And the coexistence of those 2 feelings was the most difficult thing she had felt in a long time. She left without speaking. 2 colleagues withdrew their support for her pending publication in the weeks that followed. The county gossip about her alliance with the Duke had reached the kind of volume that made institutions cautious, and institutions, in Vivienne's experience, were always cautious at precisely the wrong moment. She wrote to both men. She received polite, regretful replies. She filed the replies in the appropriate folder and continued working. She had been cited in that journal for 3 years. Her methodology, under her initials, had been read by botanists in 4 counties. She had simply assumed, that her father's institution had quietly revised its position, or that the journal editor had acted on independent principle. She had not questioned it because she had wanted it to be true, and the recognition that she had accepted a benefit without examining its origin sat uncomfortably alongside her anger at the man who had arranged it. She did not stop being angry. She continued working. The night before her counter-survey was complete, the final document, the one that would go before the commissioner, she worked past midnight and then past 1. And somewhere between 1 and 2, she fell asleep at the desk, with her cheek on her field notes and the lamp burning low. The Duke found her there. He had come to return the 1841 drainage survey, and he had knocked. And when no answer came, he had tried the door and found it unlocked, which was unlike her, and found her asleep at the desk, which was also unlike her. He set the survey on the side table. He looked at the field notes spread across the desk, 15 years of science, organized and cross-referenced and annotated in her precise hand. And he sat down in the chair across from her and began to read. He read for 2 hours, the full scope of what she had built, for the first time taking in all of it at once, not the sections he had seen piecemeal during their working sessions, but the whole, from her earliest field notes in 1867 to the completed counter-survey she had finished that evening. When she woke, he was still there, the lamp nearly out, her notes in his hands. She looked at him without speaking for a moment. "You were right about everything," he said. "The methodology, the boundary readings, the cinquefoil distribution. Every conclusion you drew is supported 3 times over. Pemberton's surveyor has no answer for this. None." Her hand was resting on the desk near his. She did not move it. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Not a proposal, a question." He looked at her hand near his, and then at her face. "Will you tell me what changed between your first refusal and now?" Vivienne considered this. Outside, rain had started again, hitting the study window in the same diagonal lines it had hit on the morning he first arrived. "I will think about it," she said. The county hearing was held in the old assembly room, which smelled of cold stone and old timber, and the particular anxiety of people who have waited a long time for something to be decided. The commissioner's table was at the far end. Pemberton sat to the left with his solicitor and his surveyor. Vivienne sat to the right with her documents and the Duke beside her, and 2 of her colleagues who had withdrawn their support were present in the room. She had seen them come in and had not acknowledged them. Pemberton's solicitor presented the fraudulent deed first, then the survey, then the geological evidence, and then, with the smoothness of a man who has prepared this particular blow carefully, produced a copy of Sir Edmund Ashmore's final paper, the one with the taxonomic error. The solicitor read the relevant passage aloud and argued in measured legal language that the misidentification of moorland sedge in Sir Edmund's foundational work undermined the botanical methodology his daughter had inherited, that her maps therefore rested on a compromised foundation, and that the commissioner should weigh this heavily before accepting her survey as authoritative. The room was quiet when he finished. Then the Duke of Cairnmore rose. "I would ask the commissioner's permission to present a document," he said. The commissioner looked at him. "You may present it." He placed the suppressed paper on the commissioner's table. Not a copy, the original, with Sir Edmund's corrections in the margins, the draft apology attached, and a cover letter from the Duke himself explaining when he had obtained it and why he had held it. He presented it completely, error and all, and then he presented Vivienne's counter-survey. Miss Ashmore identified her father's misidentification independently. He said, his voice carrying clearly in the stone room. Her field notes record the correction in 1879, 2 years before the boundary dispute began, and her counter-survey is built on the corrected classification. Her maps do not inherit the error because she found it first and corrected it. The error does not undermine her methodology. It demonstrates it. He paused. I would also ask the commissioner to note the date on which Pemberton's fraudulent deed was filed. He produced a second document, and the date on which I can demonstrate Pemberton's surveyor received a copy of Sir Edmund's paper. The surveyor used a document he knew to be in dispute. He used it knowing the correction existed. Pemberton's solicitor began to speak. The commissioner held up a hand. The commissioner read for 11 minutes. The room was silent in the particular way of rooms where something is being decided that cannot be undecided. Vivienne sat with her hands folded on the table and her field notes in front of her and looked at the far wall. And she breathed, and she waited. Pemberton's claim collapsed in the 12th minute, when the commissioner set down the documents and said, "The fraudulent deed is struck from the county record. The boundary as established by the Ashmore survey is confirmed." He looked at Vivienne. The counter-survey is entered into the county record under the name of its author, Miss Vivienne Ashmore. Her full name read aloud in that room, before the commissioner and Pemberton and the Duke and the 2 colleagues who had withdrawn their support and were now sitting very quietly near the back wall. She allowed herself one moment, one precise, private moment. And then she gathered her field notes and stood. That evening, the Duke came to Ashmore House for the last time as someone who had not been given permission to keep coming. "I am not going to propose," he said, when she had let him in and they were standing in the study. "I want to ask something different. May I keep coming to Ashmore House?" Vivienne looked at him. "I have a condition." "Tell me," he said. "When something affects me," she said, "you tell me first. Before you act, before you decide. You tell me and you let me decide what to do with it." He answered without hesitation, "Yes." He did not bargain. He did not qualify it or add a provision or suggest there might be exceptions. He simply agreed. "Then yes," Vivienne said. "You may keep coming." The following morning she was in the greenhouse, repotting a specimen she had feared losing during the weeks of the hearing, a small sedge she had collected on the moorland in 1874 and which had been neglected in the rush of the final case preparations. She was working with her hands in the soil, her back to the door, when she heard him come in. She did not turn. "You may have been right about one thing," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Which thing?" She turned. She crossed the distance between them, and she kissed him, deliberate, unhurried, the way she did most things she had decided to do. His hands came up and she let them, and the greenhouse was warm and smelled of earth and green growing things. And outside the April morning was coming in through the glass. When she stepped back, she looked at him with the expression she reserved for conclusions she had reached after sufficient evidence. "I'll let you know," she said, "after I decide whether you've earned a second." He said, "I intend to earn it." "I know you do," Vivienne said, and returned to her sedge. 2 years passed in the manner of years that are being lived rather than endured. In real conversations that went long into the evening, in shared fieldwork across the moor in every season, in arguments about methodology that resolved into agreements neither of them had anticipated reaching. Her name appeared on every publication. The journal that had been running her methodology anonymously for 3 years published a full paper under her complete name in the spring of 1881, and the editor wrote to her directly to say that the previous arrangement had been a compromise of his institution's principles, and that he was glad to correct it. She read the letter twice and put it in the appropriate file and did not discuss it with the Duke, because some things did not require discussion. He continued to come to Ashmore House. The county, which had expected scandal and received instead two people who worked together with evident mutual respect and occasional visible irritation, eventually lost interest in the question of what was happening between them and turned its attention to other matters. This suited Vivienne entirely. In April of 1882, the study at Ashmore House held two sets of field notes on the same table. Both under her name, both current, both in progress. His handwriting appeared in the margins of her botanical observations where he had added geological correlations, and hers appeared in the margins of his strata records where she had added root system data. The work had become genuinely shared in the way that things become shared when two people stop keeping score. On the table beside the notes, a new specimen label sat in his handwriting, careful and precise, the name of a sedge variety she had identified on the northern ridge the previous autumn, a species not previously recorded in the county record. He had written her name on the label in full, the date of discovery, and the location: Northern Boundary Ridge, Ashmore Moorland. Below it, in smaller letters, the notation that would go into the county's natural history record. Discovered and classified by Miss Vivienne Ashmore, October 1881. She had chosen him. He had earned it. The morning light came through the study window in long, clean lines, and both sets of notes were open, and the work continued.